I'm Margaret Miller. I'm the director of the Contemporary Art Museum, and I'm going to turn this over tonight to our curator at large, Christian Viveros-Fauné, who's been with us now for 3 years.
2018.
2018. He's now a permanent fixture with us, still at large. In other words,
Like an old lamp.
like an old lamp.
A beloved lamp. Heirloom.
And he is going to introduce Jarrett Earnest.
I am. So this is Jarrett Earnest, who is a colleague of mine, both as a curator and as a writer. I should say a treasured colleague of mine and a friend. We have a mutual friend in common, Lisa Yuskavage, with whom we've both worked, and who obviously plays a very prominent role in this exhibition. Can the guys behind you, maybe we should move back so like you're not getting our backs. But I will read Jarrett's credits in a second. But another thing that we have in common is that we're basically writer-curators, which is still weirdly fairly strange, right? It's not such a common thing.
Well, I was going to ask you if you think of yourself as more primarily one or the other, or one as an extension of the other, because I've never asked you that.
Well, that's a good question, but probably one is an extension of the other, but at this point I think they probably both hold equal weight. At this point I'm doing more curating than I'm doing writing. I used to be the critic for the Village Voice, so at that point I was writing basically every week and for other publications. But you know, now that activity has to fall off because my responsibility is here and in other places where I'm curating. But before we get into that, because I do want to get into that.
Yeah, I was ready to ask you a follow-up.
As a starting place to discuss these two concurrent and very much related exhibitions, I want to read your credits because it's important that people know you. So Jarrett Earnest is the author of What It Means to Write About Art, Interviews with Art Critics from David Zwirner Books, that was published in 2018, and the editor of Peter Sheldall's Hot, Cold, Heavy, Light, 100 Art Writings, 1988 to 2017, that was published by Abrams in 2019. Peter Sheldall, for those of you who don't know, is the New Yorker critic, art critic, right? Is it? Yes, sir. Okay, I'm going to do my best and project. I'm a crappy actor. This thing, unfortunately, doesn't sort of like project. It's just for our records. But I'll do my best. Jarrett is also the editor of Painting as a Supreme Fiction, Writings by Jesse Murry, 1980-1993, which was issued by Soberscope Press in 2021. You will find 2 copies of that book here to peruse, either on your visit today or another visit. This is the kind of exhibition that rewards looking, so I invite you to come again and again. And he is also obviously a very active curator, recently curated the exhibitions The Young and the Evil, Ray Johnson, What a Dump, and Jesse Murry Rising, together with Lisa Yuskavage at David Zwirner, New York. And additionally, recently curated the final installment of Ways of Seeing, 3 takes on the Jack Shear Drawing Collection at the Drawing Center in New York. This was just in 2022. The last rollout of Jarrett Earnest's credits I will do is to mention his pretty regular criticism. He writes, among other venues, the New York Review of Books, the Brooklyn Rail, the Village Voice, Los Angeles Review of Books, Art in America, and New York Magazine. And lastly, I will say that we are very lucky to have Jarrett here at USF as a Kennedy Family Visiting Scholar this year, which means he is here in Tampa teaching this semester. I think some of his students are here. He will additionally be giving a public lecture on September the 8th, I believe at the USF School of Music Concert Hall. Is that right? Anyone? Yes? Good. That's where it is. Right, and you can look on our website for more information and also for additional information on both of these exhibitions. Now, back to action moment.
Pose.
Exactly, action pose. Aside from the fact that this is, I mean, like I was saying before, we've known each other for a while, but this is really sort of the first time that we've gotten to work together, right? Largely through the agency of our mutual friend, Lisa Yuskavage. So let's discuss this business about storytelling, both through curation and also through art, because I think part of what we want to discuss is this great story that unwinds throughout these two shows. The usual way stories are told, obviously, is through language, but one of the amazing things, at least in my curatorial experience, is having encountered situations where, in my young sort of critical life, I experienced artists telling stories through completely different means, right? In our practice, and this is what we were talking about the other day, we tend, I think probably in different ways, but in some somewhat similar way, to tell stories through curation, right? I think you were going to have an observation about that. Maybe you can kick in.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you about, because first I want to say I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm really honored to have worked on this with you, Christian, and everybody at the Art Museum at USF. This is such an unbelievable realization of these projects, and it's very humbling for me. I would say what I was going to ask is, we're both actually interested, there's something similar, which is we both are sort of have an independent position in the art world. And part of my performance of that is that I often enjoy mocking and belittling curators whenever I can, because I think it's not really a real job. Sorry, the people that is their real job. Because, it either looks good or it doesn't look good. I don't know what to say. And so then it's like a little amusing to me that I started organizing exhibitions. And part of that was that I found that the questions that I was interested in around storytelling, around history, around narrative form could unfold in space through objects in a way that was very different than writing about it. And so I think of putting together a show as an extension of writing, basically. And so one of the reasons why Jessie Murry emerged for me as an ideal character, it almost was miraculous, like a saint in a story, once I started reading his writing, because his trajectory was as a critic, then a curator, and then a painter and a poet. And the mind that produced the work had this long journey of artistic realization that I felt very deeply related to, like I understood. And so I guess I wanted to know your perspective on doing a show like that, and especially a show of an artist that's extremely verbal, that is extremely clear about what they're doing and how they're relating to art history, as our mutual friend Lisa and then her friend Jessie are both these artists who are so adamant about the nature of their work.
Well, and also sort of the remarkable thing is that these guys get together in 1986, right? They enter the MFA program at Yale. Yale, that's like the class everyone knows about, because that's the class that graduated John Curran and Matvey Levenstein, Lisa's husband, and Richard Phillips, and Sean Landers, and a host of other people who are slightly less successful and some not successful at all. But point being that in meeting, right, Lisa, who is essentially this really working class girl from like Juniata Park, Philadelphia, and Jessie Murry, who is black, originally from the South, who's had a very scrappy life, and who sort of self-invented, as an intellectual and as a writer and as a poet. They meet, right? They meet, and despite their significant differences, not only become fast friends, but help each other develop their personas, as it were, but also their personas inside the studio, right? So that what comes out of the studio is, in some significant part, a real, genuine conversation between friends. This is like a love affair of the mind. It's chaste in the sense that it's not sexual, but it's definitively a love affair of the mind. And, if I say it's chaste because it's not sexual, it's plenty dirty, because the both of them were had vivid imaginations, as I think you can tell, in two completely different ways in the galleries that we're going to enter. I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you as we sit here and look at these landscapes, which are also, I mean, they look like Mark Rothko's, they look like abstractions, but in many ways they're not. Mm-hmm. So I was saying this to you before. Lisa and Peter Stevens, who runs the Jesse Murry Foundation, which is fairly new, right?
Yeah.
And yourself are really the world experts on Jesse Murry, right? So,
well, I'm hoping that there'll be more world experts in time. I think maybe just a very brief way that this exhibition came about.
Thank you.
So when I met Lisa Yuskavage, the painter, maybe 10 years ago, immediately she started telling me about her friend Jessie. You remind me of this friend that I had who died of AIDS, who was the smartest person that I knew, who was a genius. And it was like you would hear about Jessie in this present way always for years and years and years. And there's a moment where you're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't know. It's like you accept it, but then there's like, it doesn't really mean anything. And I think she was always, or doesn't add up to some traction in the world. And I think Lisa was always, since Jesse Murry died in 1993 from AIDS, she wanted people to engage with the work. And so when the idea for us doing this show came about, she had always said, when Jesse died, I helped his partner pack up the studio and all the work went into a storage unit. And then I Xeroxed all of his writing and notebooks and I put it in a box and I've kept it in my studio, and every studio I went to, we moved this box. And I said, oh, well, can I read the box of writing as just research? And when I started reading it, I called her and was like, Lisa, your friend was a genius. Like, this writing is unbelievable. And she was like, I know, that's what I've been telling you over and over and over. And I was like, yeah, I know, but actually, so beyond what I could have understood. So then I kind of became looped into the crusade of Jesse Murry. So basically, all of his writing and work, this man who I interviewed so many people who knew him, and so many brilliant, incredible artists said he was the smartest person I ever met. But they remember, they have the story, but there was no location for it in the world. Right. The stuff was just in a storage unit in Chelsea since he died, and then there was this box of Xeroxes. So we did this small show of late work of Jesse, these abstractions that are pitched at this really precarious edge between being abstract color field paintings coming out of the Abex school, but also being infused with all of this content. His relationship to poetry, his interest in landscape painting, especially Turner and Constable, and then his experience being a poor black guy who was dying of AIDS, and all of that stuff he believed could go into this form. It could go into color. It could go into shape. It could go into painting that wasn't about the painting that was an abstraction that ends on the surface as an object that we think of as coming out of the history of modernism, but was actually a canvas that goes the other way, that could embrace the wholeness of the world, the wholeness of a spirit, of a mind, of a sexuality. And I think that, once I got that, and I think the writing for me was the key to seeing the paintings, then I was hooked. Then there's nothing better than that. It's oh yes, of course, let's do this show, let's do this book. So that's what this show is. And then it got amplified by Christian, who's known Lisa for much, much longer.
Yeah, and I sort of want to clarify that the first iteration of this show, this exact show, right, is at David Zwirner in September of 21, correct?
Yep, last year.
Last year. So I mean, that's what this is. This show is also going to have a life at the Cooley Gallery at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, where I'm lucky enough to be curating a biennial, not at the Cooley Gallery, but in Portland, Oregon. And it will be a significant part of that larger sort of exhibition. this is an act of love. It's an act of recovery. It's a certain kind of resuscitation, right, of a career and of work, both the written work, right, the written word, and the plastic work, the work that you're seeing around the walls, the objects. Everything you say is, there's so many parts to this exhibition, but I think they're really all united by these stories, right? And the stories that have everything to do with there being sort of a sense of friendship being handed down, right? In a way, this museum, has received that friendship and has managed to sort of again, reconceptualize it, and we'll get to do it again. I know that there's a museum in Norway who's interested in taking the work. This will continue to live and continue to have a life, and Jesse's message, both aesthetically and literarily, will continue to sort of spin out. There's a great line, Hilton Als, who is the theater critic for the New Yorker, but writes about art pretty brilliantly, has a line in the preface, right, where he talks about attention as a form of active love with Jesse's work. I just think that's so profound.
Well, he's also paraphrasing Simone Weil, the great philosopher who is one of my passions. And Simone Weil said, attention taken to its utmost degree is love. It's prayer. Paying a completely unmixed attention is prayer.
To an artwork, to an object.
No, yeah, I mean,
to a seascape,
paying
to a friend,
attention to
a
anything.
person, right, exactly.
It's a form of honoring the sacredness of our experience. And so, but I think it's beautiful that you bring that up, because Hilton, in his incredible introduction to Jesse Murray's book of collected writing, he connected with that in that these works in this room, they may look like landscapes, they may look like abstract paintings, but what they're really about is about a deeply spiritual transformation of the self, to try and go beyond the self, which is what I think all sacred art is about. And he's trying to do it in his own forms without having to use pictures of angels or Jesus or anything, using abstraction as a sacred art. And I think that is, in and of itself, something that when you look at the paintings, they teach you how to pay attention.
Let's turn our attention now to some of the objects in the room. Actually, first, this video. So this video is rather, again, I mean, the emotional weight in here can be a little overwhelming at times. What Yuskavage did, well, let me back up. Literally on his deathbed, maybe you should tell the story, because I think you're better at it.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you one quick story, because I also think we should go look at the other half of the exhibition.
But I do want to look at one painting before we do that.
The story of this, because this is actually a very key thing that's kind of strange, where it's like, why is this video in here? So Jesse Murray's partner was a man named George Centani, who is still living, and he is a very, very dear man. He lives in the mountains of North Carolina. And when I started working on this with Lisa, I was like, George, I'll just come down and talk to you. And he was sort of reticent, but I hopped in my car and drove down there, and I was talking to him about Jesse, and we were looking at the writing, and all of the writing was handwritten or typeset. And so we were going through it together, correcting my typed versions. And then we got to these pages, these kind of handwritten pages that you see reproduced here. And George said, oh my God, these were the last things that Jesse wrote. He was in the hospital and he couldn't speak. And he wrote at the top, read these out loud to me. And then he read them out loud in this room, and it was like a transformative like seance, basically. And we finished working with him. I got in the car, and as soon as I got reception, I called Lisa. I was like, you're not going to believe this. We have these, like, Jesse's final poems are so beautiful. And so that started Lisa Yuskavage's brain going like tick, 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 which is like, how do we bring this into the room? Because when we curated this show and when we did the book, Lisa and I made an agreement that we didn't want to put any word in Jesse Murray's mouth. Everything had to be his language, his decisions, his descriptions, because he was extremely brilliant and clear. So let's just follow him. If we have there's a million decisions that have to be made. Let's follow whatever Jesse's showing us in the work. And so Lisa really wanted to make his voice present in the space. So she got a bunch of Jesse's friends who reconnected through this project, all very different because they were in separate parts of his life. And she worked with them to all record themselves reading back these poems of Jesse's. And then she worked with the sound artist to edit it into basically a sound piece that's a video. So when we're not on a tour, when you come in here, you'll hear Jesse's friends reading these poems. And then at the end, this is him, the man himself, like an angel. At the end, Lisa also remembered having seen a video of Jesse talking about the Reverend Howard Finster in a documentary, and moved hell or high water to get this film, and then cut the less than 30, the 10 seconds of the documentary out where Jesse's talking, and we have it at the end of this loop. And you get a sense, this is him at John Constable's house with a cat.
Go on. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Sorry.
All right. And so this is him with his partner, George, the year before he died, or actually soon before he died. And then, so you can actually hear his voice playing and talking about art. All right, so that's the end.
No, that's great. So I was just going to comment that he made the perfect appearance as you were actually sort of introducing him.
Well, as always.
Like a seance.
What I realized is that he's always right.
Right.
You know?
and he put together a show of the Reverend Howard Finster's work on at the New Museum back in the day.
In the 80s, yeah.
In the 80s, yeah.
85.
Correct. We're very lucky to be able to put on this. I mean, if we're lucky to put on that side of that gallery, right? The exhibition in that gallery, we're at least equally lucky to be able to sort of do this. Lisa Yuskavage is one of the most important painters in the world. For my money, she is the most important American painter living today, I think by a significant stretch. And she has, essentially since the mid-1990s, helped usher in or reconceive of the figure, particularly the female figure in contemporary painting, particularly contemporary American painting, right? Usually hear her name associated with John Curran. They were obviously, again, both classmates in that sort of legendary class of 1986, Yale MFA. But I think her work is really sort of, it managed to upset a lot of people initially, as Curran's did. But it has grown into a level of sort of maturity that is really just sort of tremendously impactful. You could think of her. I think she's always been way ahead of the curve. Sometimes being ahead of the curve is a dangerous thing. You get too far ahead of your troops, you're the first one who gets it in the gullet. But she's been very brave in doing what she's doing, and now essentially looks, like a pioneer, having done having made all her own decisions. Now, curiously enough, in the 1990s, she was not feeling her oats quite the way she is now, right? She was depressed. She had done a single Soho exhibition, which the work, it would be unrecognizable to you if you saw it. You can actually look it up. It was at Pamela Auchincloss Gallery. I don't remember exactly the year, but it's in the early 90s. But it consists essentially of sort of female forms with their backs to the viewers, right? Dark colors, not like this, right? There are a number of things, a number of events, a number of decisions, and a number of conversations that push her into being the painter that she is today. Many of those conversations are with Jessie Murry, right? What we wanted to do in this room is to establish that connection. I mean, the connection already exists with Jessie's work over in the other gallery, but it also exists if you just glance over your shoulder, these sort of oil on paper works, all of them undated because there's a lot of work to be done with the Jessie Murry Foundation yet. But those landscapes inform breakthrough earlier works for Yuskavage, specifically the works here and here, these watercolors. The watercolors from this particularly sort of like lovely dirty one here, all the way to the end, right? Admix landscape and figure, right? Specifically sort of the female figure, aspects of the female figure. And then these other two pieces, right? The sort of rapture. There's another one around the corner at the entrance in the front lobby wall. And they give you sort of the beginning of an inclination, the beginning of her sort of painterly inclinations, both in terms of her embrace of like low subject matter, or what other people think is low subject matter, right? And her affinity and frankly amazing technical skill in being able to pull off Renaissance techniques, right? Like sfumato, right? Which is essentially sort of this blending of colors that seem just absolutely sort of natural. They're misty, right? Also in this room, these landscapes that run over here in this wall, right? She just had, a new friend was just telling me that she'd just seen a show before COVID of Lisa's at Aspen called Wilderness, which was essentially about, again, landscape on the body. You know, these are themes that she's come back to again and again. And then you have these three sort of outstanding large-scale paintings, right? At least one of which intimately sort of connects back to Jessie, which is this one called The Snowman, which takes its title from a Wallace Stevens poem. And Jessie was very into Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens was a sort of a lodestar for him.
He introduced her to Wallace Stevens. Like, he came into her studio and was like, do you know that's Wallace Stevens' poem? And she's like, no, I don't. And he was like, okay, I'm going to wait in your studio. You go to the bookstore down the corner, buy the Wallace Stevens book, and then come back. So then she, went and did it and brought and then he read a poem to her. And so his great passion was Wallace Stevens. His description of his relationship to abstraction was through Wallace Stevens. So the title of that book, Painting is a Supreme Fiction, follows Stevens' famous poem, Poetry as a Supreme Fiction. So it's so beautiful to say, like, yes, this is a poem, this is a painting that specifically relates to Wallace Stevens' The Snowman painting, which is such a beautiful, unbelievably beautiful poem. But also, it is in its own way a kind of homage to that ongoing dialogue that you can have with someone through your mind, through the things that you're reading. So I just wanted to clarify.
No, I'm glad you did. Thank you. I think I'm going to say just a couple more things about Lisa's show, and then I'm going to take some questions. But what because I think we're going to be running out of time, and there's some nice poke out there and some solid booze, which is always good to have. But what I was going to talk about was the way Lisa essentially there's almost like a retrofeed mechanism with her imagery, right? There's what the French called an imaginaire, right? Which is a world of images, right? A significant worldview. She constructs that worldview for herself, and often those images sort of come back, and they go back and forth, right? In different series of works, different paintings. There's a small bonfire over there that has an echo here, right? I sort of did a quick count today on the interwebs. There are, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other paintings throughout her career that she's made where she references the bonfire. One of them actually, which is called Bonfire, is hanging at the Met right now. Yep, it looks fantastic. And another point of reference is a Goya Disasters of War print. It's print number 28, where again also that bonfire and the violence that it sort of like suggests also exists. She is a she is a human thresher of art historical material. She really is. And the amazing thing is that she also sort of like ingests it, and when it comes right back out again, it's reformulated significantly. Anyway, I think it's a good place to stop.
Yeah, do you have any questions?
Yeah, questions?
Comments?
Yes, no? Nothing?
Well, we're so happy that you're here. I hope that you can spend time looking at the paintings. And if you want to come up and ask us things individually, we'll be around.
Let me just say as a parting sort of like word, Lisa Yuskavage will be here speaking to us next Thursday, the 1st, right?
In the music concert hall with the reception following there.
Correct.
Thank you, Jarrett.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.